it's about the human element, right? And if you can leave an impression on someone, even if you may not be the best technical fit or the strongest technical candidate, if people think you're, nice or easy to work with, or you're going to fit into their team easier, that will give you a leg up, you know, versus being, the best problem solver on HackerRank or whatever website you might be using.
Layoffs, ghost jobs, AI. These are unprecedented times. Trying to find a job in the professional world, especially the tech sector, has never been harder. It seems the social contracts around job seeking have been all but torn up in pursuit of profits.
At the same time, there are plenty of folks out there finding new careers every day, whether through strong networking, creative approaches to job applications, or just sheer determination. There are those who have gone through the long, difficult job hunt and found success on the other end.
I'm Jason C. McDonald.
And I'm Michael Tharrington. This is On the Board, where we interview everyday people who've successfully landed jobs during the discouraging employment landscape of the last 2 years.
No out-of-touch influencers and dubious pay-to-win schemes here, just real experiences and practical insights. JJ Brenner, thank you for joining us on the Board. It's a pleasure to have you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So to kick things off, I always like to start by asking what your experience was when you first found yourself back on the job market. It's like opening that door, like that meme on LinkedIn. You open the door, and it's just like fire everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially in this particular job market, it's been a little bit different than in days of yore, where my inbox would be filled with, people reaching out and clamoring for my skill sets. It's been a lot drier out there. But I've used the same sorts of strategies and same sorts of thought processes to kind of continue navigating all of that. Um, and at the end of the day, it's a matter of finding the right fit for you and the right fit for what you're looking for, and not just anything. Sometimes you just need anything, but that I find that puts you back in the same shoes very quickly, more often than not, if you're just grabbing anything. So.
Right on. Could you tell us just a little bit about your background, where you were working when you left your previous job, and then kind of what sort of jobs you were scoping out? What kind of position is it that you generally hold?
Yeah, for sure. So, my background is in software and software development. I've been doing software in some way, shape, or form since 2005, so just under 20 years. And I've run the gamut in terms of the types of roles. I've done individual contributor stuff, I've done management stuff, I've done, technical advisor, consulting. I've even been engaged as a sales engineer at one point in my career, kind of handling, custom software solutions and being that go between the sales force and the development team. So I've done a ton. I've seen all different sides of the process, and but it's all comes back to engineering at the end of the day. So for me, the types of roles that I focus on and scope for are, principally more senior level roles. Ones that have probably a leadership component to it were ones that I was really focused on, which are fewer and far between, than say your general individual contributor role. But at the end of the day, it's gonna be what's best for you. I've done a lot of IC stuff, and my role right now was supposed to be much more individual contributor, and it turned out that's not actually what they needed when they hired me. So I'm doing a lot more project and people management and process, transformation for this organization than I originally intended to. But that's all good too. So.
So did you often find that the stuff you were finding was kind of nudging you in a, like you were mentioning that you were originally looking kind of a little more away from the IC individual contributor role, and yet you kind of you wound up in one that at least looked like it was going to be one initially. Like, were you finding yourself kind of pushed by market forces into the box that you typically had historically filled? And did you find any ways of kind of breaking out of that sort of pigeonholing?
Yeah, so great question. So, for me, I have been fortunate in that um, while I actively look and I actively go after roles, the roles that I've had, I mean, every single position I've ever had, um, the roles have found me and not the other way around. Like I might have been reaching out and talking to that recruiter, but the recruiter or whomever was on the other end, they had, something on their desk and we were able to make it fit. So for me, it's about having those conversations. Obviously when you turn on that open to work button on LinkedIn or you start applying to jobs or whatever it is, there's a lot of keyword modification that people think about, and they look for those specific keywords. So like in my situation, software engineering manager probably doesn't appear anywhere on my resume, even though that's the job that I've held for the most part for the past like 4 years, even with my previous role, has been doing that sort of a job. And so for me to escape that pigeonholing, I mean, there's some, resume massaging that you can do. You can obviously adjust keywords on your resume and get some more hits that direction. But it comes down to having the conversations with the individuals that you're connecting with. Ultimately, you know, even if you're just throwing out thousands of applications or however you're happening to come across the roles that you're going for, there's going to be a person involved at some point. Um, I've seen videos of AI recruiters holding tech screens and things like that, but I don't know that that's a real prolific thing at this point. But there's going to be a person on that end at some point, and sometimes that conversation, um, the way you lean into it, can help you break open some of those barriers a lot easier than trying to play keyword bingo with some matching algorithm.
So, just hearing you talk about how a lot of the roles have kind of come to you in some way, is there well, I'm thinking of this in two ways. Is there both a way that you have sort of shaped your LinkedIn profile or anything like that to kind of draw folks in? And then also when recruiters come to you, do you have a way of kind of rooting out the different opportunities that they're bringing to you and to see if they're serious or to see if they're a good fit or maybe even just to see if the recruiter in general is someone that could help you?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great question. So, for me, it's all about building relationships. I have 3 or 4 people in my pocket that at any point in time, if I said, "Hey, John, or Neil, looking, what do you got?" They've got 3 or 4 things, on their plate almost all the time. This last go around was a little bit tougher because they didn't have as nearly as many opportunities. But so I've built those over time, and I was introduced to those people by other people within the engineering space. And so my first kind of answer to that would be, no matter who you are, where you are, what you're doing, leverage the resources and the people around you, because somebody knows somebody and they'll introduce you to somebody else, and that person could be the CEO of the next company, who, when they pass your resume down to the hiring manager says, "Oh, CEO says pay attention. I'm going to pay attention." That's actually how I landed in the role that I have now. I was working with a recruiter who, mentioned at an organization that they were working with, and I said, "Well, I know people that work there. Um, maybe I can, get my foot in the door, um, kind of coming in through the side as well." So the recruiter is obviously sending me details, but then I just asked a couple questions of people that I knew from 7, 8 years ago, and they're like, "Oh yeah, let me go talk to X and tell them that this is happening. And so got the good word in there. That got me in the door, and then that's where you need to go because I mean, especially in today's world, um, employers are flooded with qualified people, not just people in general, but there's a lot more, especially in the engineering space, there's a lot more engineering talent available, and organizations can take time to be picky. So, first is always leverage the network that you have, always leverage the people that you know. Um, I would say be intentional with your LinkedIn connections and things like that. I mean, I probably should go through a purge and clean mine out. But there's a lot of far-reaching pieces that you can get from just having a big network. But the second piece and kind of answer to that question is don't be afraid to ask questions of the recruiters or whoever else is on the line. Like ask them about what they do. What kinds of roles are you looking for? They might just be a sourcer. Right. A lot of times you're just talking to people who their only job is to get you on the phone and to get a resume submitted. And they don't have any ability to follow anything up. They're not the ones that are actually interacting with the client. They don't really actually know what they're looking for other than a list of keywords. And, just asking questions about, hey, what's your role in this process? How do you know, how are you going to be working me through this whole process? And most people are not, afraid or ashamed to say, well, hey, here, this is my particular role. Here's how I fit. And if it's someone who's just a foot in the door, then spend the appropriate amount of time on that. Building, a conversation for an hour with them about, what the client's looking for or how we can massage your resume or whatever, highlighting experience that may not be incredibly valuable there, but they might be able to introduce you to their account manager or something like that. And, not being afraid to ask those questions, kind of taking that engineering mindset of understanding what the problem is, what problem are you trying to solve, and applying it to your job search and the conversations that you're having. You know, discovering what the real issue is underneath, what the real meat of the problem is that they're trying to solve. Because it's rarely just, well, we need another XYZ engineer with four skills, right? Where, is this growth? Is this backfill? Is it, a position where they're, transitioning one person to another? Are there internal candidates? Sometimes recruiters will know those things. Sometimes they won't. If it's a desk recruiter, they're less likely to know some of those things. But if it's an internal recruiter, especially, they're going to have a lot more insight into what you're looking for and what you're doing, and they can give you that insight into not just what the company's looking for, but potentially also what hiring managers, the people that you might be meeting with on a panel, etc., that they're interested in, and so then you can tailor your own conversation and present yourself in the most positive light possible. I'm not saying make things up, but imposter syndrome is another thing we deal with in engineering circles as well. Like we don't really know what we're doing. We're trying to solve a problem, so we're gonna make educated guesses and attack it one piece at a time. Um, and so instead of trying to solve the giant problem of I need X feature available, we got to get through those first few pieces and taking it one step at a time. I think that's probably what's been most effective for me is having those relationships and building those over the course of years, um, and then just not being afraid to ask a question. Um, I think especially if you're, less tenured in your career, you might see, oh, a job opportunity, it's a shiny thing, treat it carefully. I don't want, to screw it up. Um, but I mean, especially when we're talking about recruiters, they work for you as much as they work for, the employers as well. You're their product that they have to sell, and if you can make yourself easier to sell or easier to present by asking a couple questions, you're doing everybody a favor.
You mentioned reaching out to recruiters that you've known for a while, and one of the things I struggle with because I know some recruiters is how do I restart that conversation after however long of it being cold? Maybe not having a lot of contact. how do you kind of restart that dialogue in a way that doesn't feel like I want something from you, you know?
Sure. That's a good question. I mean, I'm a very forward person and straightforward in that sense, and so depending on who it is, I might just say, "Hey, what do you got right now?" Because ultimately, and I'm not trying to criticize or anything. Ultimately, most recruiters are some form of sales individual, right? They're selling a role to a candidate, or they're being asked by a company to go find these people, and so they've got to get you interested in what's going on, and so you're basically saying to them, pitch me. What's going on, but also, I mean, so to take that in kind of a secondary direction. So again, using the path I got to my current role, um, asking a recruiter that I hadn't talked to in a while, a question of, Frank kind of framed in this way of, hey, I'm finding myself in a place where I'm going to be looking for a job soon. I had some forewarning that that the role that I was in was going to disappear. So I got ahead of the game and I said, hey, I'm going to be looking in the job market probably in the next X time frame. Um, I'm interested in branching out and seeing what's in my network, who might be able to introduce me to people, and curious what you've got going on right now. And you can add, a cordial, howdy do or something like that, at the beginning of something there. But that's a great way to do it, because then you're not, to your point, saying, "Oh gosh, give me all the jobs you have, submit me to everything. I'm desperate." You're saying, "Hey, I'm looking out for, what's going to happen. I'm looking at the landscape. I'm interested in, your insight in what's going on. Um, is there anyone you can introduce me to? Do you have, roles that you're looking at, et cetera? I'd be, interested in seeing, what's out there, et cetera." So you can just come right out and say it. And I personally have not experienced a situation where that's been offensive to anyone I've interacted with. But your mileage may vary. So
Well, getting into that next phase, like after that recruiter has presented you with some options and you've found one that you like, or maybe you applied somewhere on your own and they've gotten back to you, and you're getting ready for the first interview and what's to follow. How do you go about preparing for those things? Are you digging into your past? Are you digging into what the company does? Is it a mix of both, or what's on your mind when you're going into that first interview?
yeah, sure. I try to have at least a cursory knowledge of their business. What do they do? If for no other reason, because they're going to ask you what interests you in this, right? And if your answer, is, well, I need a job and you have one, that's less compelling than, hey, this is what your company appears to be standing for. Like, these are the sorts of things that you're interested in, whether it's what they do for a business, how they generate their revenue. You could be interested in that. The organization that I work for right now is very invested in small and medium businesses and helping them expand their market share. I'm a big proponent of small business. Boom, one to one, right? I believe in this, right? A lot of organizations also, and this is something that I've found really resonates with people. They'll post, core values or the why we do what we do, as on their website, things like that. I'll look for something like that and grab that and try and identify with what I call a business's noble purpose, right? Because a business exists to generate revenue. I mean, have to keep the lights on, but most businesses have a reason why they're doing it too, right? Now, their mission of generating revenue and their noble purpose might be really similar. They might be, very different from each other. But if you identify with an organization's noble purpose and, hey, here's why I think your organization is great, then you're speaking to, kind of the soul of the company, if you will. And, even if it's just some corporate slogan or something like that, you're at least setting yourself a little bit apart from, the next person. So, I think those kinds of things are very interesting to know. Um, I think at the end of the day, you should have just two or three questions that you just have in your back pocket all the time that you ask in interview, um, every single conversation you have, because you'll rehearse those and you'll be very comfortable with them. And two, you'll then kind of start to get ideas of what to expect, as far as answers from people. And you can follow that up with something that's interesting to them and interesting to the person on the other side of it. Again, showing that you're paying attention, that what's going on, and that this is more than just a transactional conversation. Um, uh, Recruiting and job finding, especially with the proliferation of the internet. I mean, I worked for Monster.com for a decade, right? Back in its heyday. So the proliferation of online advertising has turned the what was once a very, quote unquote elegant and noble profession of headhunting and building relationships and finding people to a very transactional thing, um, or it can be very transactional. And so you kind of have to, take the good with the bad. The good is you can reach far more people and far more opportunities than you ever could. The bad is it probably takes a little bit more effort to make yourself stand out, with that relationship piece, right? Again, it's the human element. Um,
Traded the hot cuisine, the high class cuisine for fast food,
yes,
basically.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's about the human element, right? And if you can leave an impression on someone, even if you may not be the best technical fit or the strongest technical candidate, if people think you're, nice or easy to work with, or that you're going to fit into their team easier, that will give you a leg up, you know, versus being, the best problem solver on HackerRank or whatever website you might be using. So,
I have run into that question a few times, and I always get a little hung up on it. Well, not always, but sometimes it's like, well, why do you want to work for us specifically? And of course, more than a few people have observed, we're looking for you to compliment how amazing we are. And I think
yeah.
your advice of identifying with the mission is helpful. Um, Not exactly a question, but I'm just remembering an interview I had where it was an interesting looking job, but I had never really thought about working in that industry before. And I was asked, well, what excites you about this? And my first answer, the one I did not say, was nothing. It's a job. Um, and to be fair, there were some things that did kind of excite me, but it's like it wasn't like I had, the way he phrased. I can't remember how I phrased exactly, but it was something like, what compelled you to apply here? We wanted to hear how I ever since I was 5 years old, I've always wanted to work for this company or something. And anyway, and I wound up saying, well, I pick my adventures very opposite of many people. I don't decide to climb a mountain because I picked out that mountain. I find the joy and the challenge in the mountain that's in front of me. And so this looks interesting and I want to learn more, but I was not aware of this problem until now. And I think it would be an interesting thing. It's a little, I've done some similar things, a little different than what I've done though. And he seemed satisfied with the answer, but it was just um, it was interesting the fact I was able to come up with that on the fly because I never do well with that. Why are you excited to work for this company you've never heard of in this industry you really didn't even know existed?
Yeah. Especially if it's, I mean, I've found something similar, especially in maybe those first, phone screens, things like that, where maybe even a corporate recruiter reached out to you and says, "Hey, we're XYZ, organization. Here's what we're about. I want you to meet with my hiring manager." And you're like, "Great." 2 days later, you got that hiring manager conversation. They ask you, and you're like, you called me." You know, it's like that's fine. I mean, that's a fine answer, but having, something in your back pocket, in if I'm pulling a real blank, if I really dropped the ball and did zero research, which has happened, I'll be honest, I'll kind of spin it back on them. Like, well, tell me what your favorite part of the role is. Like, what are you looking for? Like, what do you look forward to most about your role? I'm looking for a new adventure. Tell me something that you think is exciting. And sometimes, you can not con them, but get them to kind of give you an answer and kind of tag off of that or dovetail is like, oh yeah, no, I find that really interesting too, you know, um, etc. So it doesn't, again, I'm not advocating that people make things up or say a complete falsehood, but presenting yourself in the most, appealing light to somebody requires just a little bit of nuance, right?
Finesse.
Yes.
Totally. Well, and this might be like kind of a goofy question, but one thing I've noticed as I've been going through these interviews as a more senior candidate in the community manager space, I've been going through a lot of like multi-part interviews, with like 4 or 5 part interviews sort of things. And I'm curious, as I'm expecting that. Well, have you experienced something similar? I should say. I don't want to just put that on you. If that is that general for your type of position as well, or
I mean, my experience, at least within the engineering space, is there's typically three, right? Maybe more. If they have more, I mean, I'll be forthright right at the beginning and just ask, like, okay, well, what's the purpose of this interview or this interview? Sometimes it's, well, hey, everybody wants to meet you, and VP only has X amount of time, or we want different countervailing opinions of you. An organization that I worked with in the past, we had a three-step process that we did all at once, where we'd have a technical interview. They called it a consultant interview. It was with much more of a personality kind of fit. Can you talk to clients? And we don't have to worry about having a dump button or something anytime you're on a call. And then one with like a director level, where they would ask their own set of questions. So there was in that, like, with that organization, technically it was 5 steps in it, but 3 of them were all at once, right? So I just ask those questions like, hey, well, what are the goals of these different pieces? Sometimes a recruiter or an HR person, they can give you those details. Hey, this is specifically a technical piece. This is specifically, to meet the team and ask those kinds of questions. Apologize about that. Um, and then there's more general fit things as well. But my experience is there's typically been 3, maybe 4. A technical piece, a personality piece, and then some form of uh, initial conversation or a conversation with a C-suite person, right? Someone who isn't involved in the day to day, but wants to be involved in, who's on our team, right?
I've seen. I just have to add to that. I have seen at least 3 companies where they had 8 or 9 steps
Oof.
to hiring just a normal engineer. Which, I mean,
Yeah.
that's excessive at that point.
I I would probably tell them, and this is me, my person. I'd probably tell them, I'm willing to commit X amount of hours to this. After that, I have to start billing you. And tongue in cheek, but that also avoids the like, oh, here's the 6-hour coding exercise that we'd like you to do for free. It's like, well, no, sorry, I don't have the time and energy for that. I have 6 kids. Like I barely have time for my own job most days. So
So, and that's that leads me to another thing. Then is you just mentioned the coding challenge. Like this is for software engineers especially. This gets thrown at us all the time. As
Yeah,
build this thing. Everything from find all the even numbers in the list to to design a movie ticket selling system, and I wish I would made either of those up, but they are both real challenges I've encountered.
yeah. My favorite is the program a coffee machine, right? Is I've seen that one multiple times. I started seeing it back in like 2015, 2016. It started popping up. They're like, here's the parameters for an automatic barista. Um, you know, build the machine. And it's like, I get what they were going for. I get some of the pieces and some of the equations there, but the exercise in and of itself is completely and totally arbitrary and almost should be treated as such. So
How do you in general get through those, especially when it seems to have nothing to do with the job or suspiciously like paid work that they're getting for
yeah,
free?
yeah. Well, the for me personally, the paid work ones, they generally have a very distinct smell to them. They're generally very very complex and targeted at a very specific thing. And I'll just ask, hey, is this a problem that you guys are you facing right now and you're looking for solutions? If so, I'd love to discuss it with you. I'm not going to sit here and spin my wheels and do it, but let's get on a call. I'll give you an hour. Like, let's talk through it. Let's talk through how I would approach this problem. Let's talk through what you've already done. Because me throwing, if you're trying to actually solve a problem, and I'm just throwing you solutions you've already seen that don't work for XYZ reason, then there's some nuance to that. There's something more to be discovered, and that discovery is what I'm interested in. Anyone can write code. Shoot, computers can write code these days, right? You don't need me specifically typing on a keyboard to to make your business work. You need me to discover the problems, to help you design the solutions, etc. So um, I wouldn't say I avoid coding challenges at all costs, but I do as much as I possibly can to turn them into conversations about what we're doing and what the goals are instead of a, you know, time boxed exercise, how many lines of code can you output, etc. I know there's a lot of tools out there, my past role, we used one that what your mileage may vary on those as well. They all have grading scales, they all have a certain amount of, things you have to meet for a success threshold. Sometimes the questions are really, really worded poorly. Um, Sometimes you run into compilation errors. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong in those situations. And so, on top of the issue that, at least in my world and the people that I've met, most engineers don't prefer someone watching them over their shoulder with a clock saying ready, set, go. You know, coding challenges they kind of are what they are. I say for me, do your best. Don't try not to stress about it. Do any practice activities that you can, and research the tests too. Um, sometimes, especially if an organization is using, one of the big services, HackerRank or something like that, people have discussed like that particular question before, so you can have an idea of how you might want to approach it, or have a thought process. Um, going in. I always ask what the purpose of the challenge is. Um, are we attempting to, is this the proverbial, dummy check, prove that I know how to write code sort of thing? Or is this we're trying to discover something about me, right? If we're trying to discover a thought process, we're trying to discover how I would approach a problem, you know, that's much more accomplished in a conversation than by me, solving, a coding challenge. I personally now I've built a team with this organization we've got 12 engineers now. Um, I've hired almost every one of them. I gave them all a coding challenge, but I preface it as I don't want you necessarily to write code. If you want to write code, if you want to solve it, if you want to give me an implementation of your idea, that's great. I want to discover how you'd approach this problem. There's two or three issues within the challenge that are all very straightforward for the most part that you kind of have to discover because it's one of those challenges of here's a bean counting machine. It's got these kinds of rules. What are the problems? Like build the bean counting machine. But the way that you approach the implementation and your thought process there is more of what I'm interested in of how you're going to break that problem down rather than can you Google syntax for these sorts of things for 8 hours a day. So
Yeah.
that's my personal approach. Again, I don't avoid them like the plague, but when someone says, "Oh, by the way, we have this," I always just ask a couple more questions. What's the purpose? Um, what sorts of things should I expect? Do you have any insight? I've even uh, I've even been in the situation where I've asked enough questions and talked to someone where they were just like, you know what? I'll just give you some examples of what a solution might look like, and come up with something on your own too. And I'm like, great, cheat sheet, and you kind of run it from there. So.
I have to add to that really quick. I was once asked to build a binary search tree during an interview, and I said, "All right, I will on one condition. Tell me the last time you needed this in your job."
Yeah.
And he said, "We haven't used it yet." I said, "Then why are you having me build one?"
Yeah. You can tongue in cheek, Google it right in front of them, how to do this, and say, "Here you go."
Absolutely.
Well, look, y'all, I know we're running up on time here, and we generally have one question we like to end with. So, JJ, is there any other advice you have for folks who are currently out there looking for work on the market?
So the thing that served me the best over the last 20 years is to never be caught flat-footed when it comes to looking for a job. And what I mean by that is uh, I'm always looking for a job. If a recruiter calls me, if somebody, tells me about a role that sounds interesting, I'm always interested in having a conversation, right? Um, within the engineering space, um, a lot of times people are seen as interchangeable, and sometimes jobs are that way too, right? You might feel like a cog in a machine. Well, the machine, you can get a new machine too, right? And sometimes there's a better fit for you, and you just don't know it yet. And so by continually, keeping at least your ear to the ground, maybe you're not responding to every phone call that comes through. Maybe you're not clicking through on the job boards and applying to a bunch of roles, but keep the door open, keep those conversations happening, and you just never know, right? I was lucky to have a very short downtime, between when my role was terminated and my new role picked up because I was proactive and I knew like I said before, I knew my role was going to be cut before it actually happened. So I had a little bit of run time to kind of get in ahead of that, prior to any severance or whatever that they offered. But the conversations for the role that I'm in now had started before that even. So it just became more serious of like, hey, I found out in 3 weeks, thanks for the memories. Where are we at with this? And kind of kept things moving that way and just to more aggressively. So don't be afraid to take a phone call. Don't be afraid to answer an email, just because you have something that you're happy with. Um, a conversation never hurt anybody, and if an organization is going to get mad about you interviewing um, somewhere else, then maybe that's not the organization for you.
Absolutely.
Great advice.
Thank you so much, JJ. It's been a pleasure, as always.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your time.
Good having you on.